So dudes, welcome to my Commanding Force Defender tier list. This video could have been released a week earlier, 2 weeks earlier. It wouldn't have mattered because we're not really getting a lot of changes done to the defense specifically. I'm going to go through the operators for this list in release order as opposed to what I did last time. If you're not familiar with the tiers themselves, let's break them down. S, these are operators that are good in pretty much every single freaking scenario you can think of. There's pretty much no downside to bringing them. A tier means that they're good in a lot of situations, and they may be a primary sort of key to a defensive composition. B means that they are a strong aspect of the composition, but they can be swapped out on occasion. C means that they are in their place, right? They're there. They fulfill a role, and it's not bad. But when we get down to D tier, that's when we're starting to get into like really, really niche kinds of situations where they're not bad, but they're just not as good as other options. And F, there's always going to be a better option. We're going to see a pretty normal distribution curve that's going to reflect something along this kind of shape, which, tends to be the case for a lot of these videos. And I think that's good balancing. That's nothing to be upset about. And yeah, so let's just go through it. We have a lot of characters to cover here. I don't particularly remember the order that I put them in, so some of these are going to be a surprise to me, but I still have the rationale in the back of my cranium here. So, starting off. Kapkan. Okay, Kapkan is right in the middle. Kapkan is a lot better than he used to be, I think, especially in this very gunner-centric kind of meta. Forcing people to adjust crosshair placement is very, very powerful. And you can bring Kapkan into... He's a very nice X factor. He's a very nice, I don't know what else to bring here. I'll bring a Kapkan kind of character, right? There are going to be situations where you're going to need the wall deny. You're going to need the intel deny. But, especially for maps that have a lot of geometry where you can take advantage of putting them on door frames, you can get very versatile with the actual placement of them. You can put them on the bomb site. You can put them a little bit further away from the bomb site as entry denial to the building itself. You can use them as early warning tools in terms of like intel gathering, or you can just get a free pick off of them if somebody manages to run into them without paying attention really late into the round. So it's one of these characters that what they bring to the table isn't a deal breaker, but it is nice to have on occasion. And so for that reason, Kapkan's B tier. And of course, some people are not going to like this one. Tachanka. Tachanka's F tier. Tachanka is only F tier because as an area denial character, you have other characters in the form of Smoke and Goyo that can do his job in a much more dynamic way. And I'll talk about that when we get to that section of the video. But Tachanka is way too slow. His animations are very choppy and leave him super exposed because he has to get out his third weapon, which leaves him very vulnerable. The reload animation is quite long. Yeah, in the utility meta that we saw around circa 2020, you could get kind of creative with the way you could bounce the fire nades off of terrain and stuff. But as of now, you really need that element of flexibility in your lineup, and Tachanka is just not a flexible character right now. His DP27 gun is nice in the sense that it has that little quirk of being able to be used as a utility gun, but as a gunfighting weapon, it really stinks. Its damage output is super slow, his rate of fire is very low, so he's very vulnerable in gunfights, and his gadget doesn't bring a lot to the table that other characters don't do. There isn't a situation in the game right now where you want a Tachanka over a Goyo or over a Smoke, and as a result of that, if you can't justify bringing him over those two characters, he has no justification for really being brought at all, which is kind of a shame. So I can't place him much higher than that. Another Pathfinder op, Bandit. So Bandit is not the primary wall guy right now. That role is usually going to be left up to Mute and Kaed, but Bandit is useful for tricking right now. Ever since he got that adjustment where you can put multiple batteries on the same wall, or rather you can start an animation for another battery while there is one that is disabled on the wall, Bandit has a lot more flexibility. The problem right now with Bandit, and the reason that I can't place him higher than this, is because Ace exists. Ace pretty much counters Bandit tricking thoroughly because Bandit cannot cover the extent of the wall at the same time. When Ace throws two Selmas in the wall, that's done. There's no counterplay for Bandit in that aspect. Bandit can also be countered by vertical play, right? He has to be on the wall itself, so he's limited in the positioning game as a result of that. However, Bandit is not a bad character by any stretch of the imagination, right? Having any kind of wall denial at all is really nice, and if you can anticipate the enemy not bringing an Ace, some teams will actually ban Ace in competitive environments just so they can get a Bandit trick off. So he serves his purpose, and it's fine. He also has a good gun, and he has C4. Next on the list is Jaeger. This guy used to be up here. Ever since we've moved away from the very utility soak kind of meta, Grenade catch is not as useful as it used to be. It's still very good, especially for linear sites where you can take advantage of the map geometry and you can take cover and bunker up. For example, Oregon Blue tarps, right? That elbow section where smoke plays. Anytime you need a deployable shield, Jaeger is perfect, where you can put up 2 Jaeger ADSs, and that's kind of the standard sort of setup with a deployable shield. Jaeger is good on staircases. Jaeger is good on a number of different sites, but he's not mandatory. There are situations where you can swap things around, and there are situations where he's probably not going to be the best option. Sometimes you need Wamai to have that more dynamic ability to respond throughout the course of the round by throwing the discs wherever you want across a room. Jaeger is set at the beginning of the round, and then once those are set, that's kind of what you get. So he's good on the sites that he's good on, but he's not good on every single site in the game right now. And there are some situations where you can forego the grenade catch for a more aggressive or a off-pick sort of strategy with other characters that we'll talk about throughout the course of this video. Next, I think, is our first D tier, Rook. So that one's going to irritate some people as well. Rook is a great ranked operator. Don't get me wrong. But when you get into a competitive environment, what the hell are you going to do with the extra health, right? Why would we bring extra health when we can bring I guess I'll spoil the S tier, right? Why would we bring Rook when we can bring a Solis, when we can bring an Azami, when we can bring a Kaed, right? There's so many other characters that you can bring besides Rook, Maestro, Mozzie, right? Characters that actually have some kind of util impact in the round, something that they bring to the table that actually forces the attackers to address that situation, right? Whereas Rook is just, you can win another gunfight, maybe 2 more gunfights, right? And that's cool, but there's one-shot headshot, and gunfights aren't everything, right? What leads to the gunfight is what makes Siege Siege. And when you have a character design like this, it's good for an off-pick sort of strategy where you really want to turtle up on a particular piece of map control you want to keep. Sometimes you can combo up with a Doc, you can combo up with a Thunderbird, but Rook's utility is very limited. For what it is. Keep moving. I think we got our C tier. Yes, Pulse. Pulse is a good character. Again, when we go to C tier, we're not talking about bad characters. And we're not even talking about bad characters in D tier. But with C tier, Pulse is not a mainstay character, correct? There are plenty of situations where he is useful, but there are also plenty of situations where you might want to bring something else. Pulse has his job in verticality. He has his job on certain kinds of sites where he can keep himself safe, where he doesn't have to allocate the team's resources to keep him alive, right, in terms of positioning game, in terms of roam game. A good example I can think of is Bank Basement, where he can hide in the gold vault and give information on the players that are pushing from server side. He can give the exact number of operators, and that can kind of dictate your defense positioning a little bit, right? Because if you see 3 characters, then you know that 2 of them might be allocated towards the hatch, might be allocated over towards marble stairs. So it gives you a good positioning advantage, but there are plenty of situations where Pulse can get dealt with very quickly, right? If he is not exact with his positioning, if he doesn't have the awareness, he can get tracked down pretty quickly. And if he gets spotted on the board, a lot of attackers will just allocate so many resources to dealing with the Pulse that sometimes it's just not worth the effort, right? It's just not worth the hassle. So he is good on certain kinds of sites where he can remain safe, where he can position himself away from gunfights, but there are better characters to do that kind of job than Pulse a lot of the time. And because we're going in release order, I think Castle is next at B tier. Yep, Castle. Castle gets very easily countered by Sledge, and as a result of that easy hard counter, I can't place him a whole lot higher, but for the situations where Castle is useful, he is very useful. There's plenty of sites where I think Castle can fit into a composition. Anything with a lot of window play, Castle is very good. Castle is very good on the map Consulate. Castle is very good on Coastline. Castle is good on top floor Oregon, right? He can funnel the defenders. He can funnel the attackers and force them to use utility to open up the sight line that they want. Not just good on window play, but he also has a lot of versatility in terms of the way that he can actually construct the map. He can construct the defense in a certain kind of way that only he can do. But because he is very easily countered by explosives, even though he does have 4 of those panels, and because he has a UMP-45, which isn't a great primary weapon, he is useful at that utility game, and that's kind of it, right? He can't go too much higher because there are going to be lots of situations where it's like, I don't want to force a castle into the situation here, right? I don't have the right kind of sight. I don't have the right kind of environment for this to work. So Castle's good where he is, and he's not great in a lot of other situations as well. Now we're still in the Pathfinders, and we got our first S tier, Smoke. Smoke is one of the most widely played competitive operators. I think he has the highest, if you don't include ban rates, next to Azami and Solis, highest pick rate characters in the game right now. Because there's really no huge disadvantage to bringing a Smoke. What are you foregoing when you bring a Smoke? He has a shotgun that's a guaranteed one shot up close. He has the SMG-11, which is one of the best full auto guns in the game. The shotgun has utility. He's good for sight setup. He has area deny, which is always going to be useful. And you can use that area deny at any point he wants, wherever he wants, from safety. Especially in this very gunfighter kind of centric meta right now, area denial is really good to have because it dictates your positioning options as the defense. It gives you a certain kind of it gives you the certain kind of ability to react to gunfighting situations in terms of positioning that you would not have if you didn't bring Smoke. He also has a deployable shield, which is a great piece of utility, and he can synergize that with the smoke canisters. Smoke is extremely versatile. There are very few situations where I look at a Smoke on the board and I'm like, I think we could forego this for something else. He's extremely good. And then we're going to go to another one of Smoke's SAS buddies, Mute. So Mute is not Smoke. Mute is not as useful in as many situations as Smoke, but because Mute has a combination of intel deny with the jammers to deny drones, and he has a layer of wall deny with the jammers as well, Mute offers a lot to the table in ways that other characters here don't really do. He's a lot more versatile. He's a Swiss Army man of sorts. He has a shotgun for sight setup. He has C4. He has the SMG-11. He can do a little bit more of a roamer kind of job if he swaps to the MP5K as well, which is somewhat more difficult now since he got the 3 armor change, because he makes a lot of noise. He can't really go for that deep roam as effectively as he used to, but he still kind of can if you're feeling up to it. Mute just brings so much to the table that it's really hard to put him any lower than the tier that he's at, but I can't put him much higher, right? Because there are other characters that have a much more impactful kind of presence on the board. You would never ban a Mute, right? There's not a lot of situations I can think of unless you're talking about a very, very specific sort of strategy where you'd bring a Mute because you don't want to forego the Mute when you go on defense later. He's a linchpin kind of character that has a place in tons of different situations, and there aren't a lot of situations where you're going to go, I can forego the Mute for something else, unless you want something specifically done, like for Kaed to get the hatches, right? Mute can't cover that. But for everything else, Mute can. Anyway, Your Honor, my client pleads oopsie daisies. I had a bit of a brain fart here with Doc. Rook and you might have noticed that I went to these characters and didn't go to the other GIGN brother. So Doc, I can't put it D tier because he is better than Rook, but he's not up here. Doc is C tier. Doc has a job that is very specific and kind of limited in that sense, right? Where he is good as a defensive posture kind of character who can hold something like a staircase, something like a pillar position where they are expected to swing back and forth. Doc can help people from a distance, which is really powerful, and he can do it with a ton of health. He can pick himself up if he gets downed. He can pick up other down teammates. He has a lot more flexibility in terms of his healing output than Thunderbird, right? Thunderbird is limited to that particular position where the Kona station goes. Doc is a little bit more versatile in that aspect. But because it's kind of a situational sort of thing where that health isn't going, a lot of the time it's not going to dictate the attacker's strategy, right? It's just a gunfight sort of difference, right? Because that's not a really big utility play, it's not used a ton in competitive. I don't think I know that we had a ton of operator variety at this particular invite, but I didn't see Doc played a whole lot. And there's a reason for that, because there are other characters that you would rather have than a Doc in a lot of compositions. So next up, Frost. So Frost does one thing. She messes with crosshair placement, and she's very good, for instance, on Chalet top floor. A lot of the entrances to that part of the map are done through vault prompts. When you can disrupt a vault prompt and force an attacker to look down instead of look at the oncoming gunfight, you pretty much force that attacker into a sort of dilemma where they have to put themselves in a vulnerable state in order to deal with your trap. That's what makes Frost work really well. But because it's a very limited sort of piece of utility, it's good for those particular sites, but there are a lot of situations where it's not great. Oregon Basement, I wouldn't bring a Frost, for instance, because there's not going to be a lot of situations where that animation prompt is going to be useful. Now, there are some situations where you can put the Frost mat like around a corner in like a cheeky kind of position. It's a nice kind of off strat, especially in ranked. But in a competitive environment, you're really looking for that crosshair placement sort of adjustment. You're really looking for that surprise element. Good situation to bring Frost in Oregon would be top floor. I did see the Frost mat actually get some mileage out of that little drop from the attic down onto the tarps. But for the most part, Frost has her job, and then that's kind of it. She's kind of limited into that sort of situation there where you're forcing people to either pick a gunfight or pick to shoot the Frost mat. So that's our first DLC op, and now the rest of these are going to be DLC ops, non-vanilla ops. Valk. Valk is S tier. Valk gets banned so freaking much. I'll actually show you how much she still gets banned even after the nerf where she can't throw the cameras outside. All right, here we are. Here's the pick and ban for invite for defenders. As you can see here, Valk has 52-ish percentage ban rate right now. That's over half, right? That's slightly over half. So, I wouldn't say well over. A little over 50% of the time, a little over half the time, Valk is banned because the influence that she has in a round completely changes the way that you approach the attack because you have to worry about verticality all the freaking time. And the only way that you can counter the verticality is to bring a character that you don't really want to justify bringing a lot of the time because her util, let's be honest, isn't that great. IQ, she doesn't have frag grenades, she doesn't have a Gon 6, right? There are other options that you want to bring. You don't want to play rock, paper, scissors in Rainbow Six Siege, right? You want flexibility in your lineup. And Valk just forces the attackers to deal with her, deal with the verticality with the C4, with the cameras. She has flexibility in terms of the camera placement. She can throw the cameras wherever she wants. She can hide them, right? She's just a general nuisance, and the impact that she has is so freaking powerful that teams, more often than not, would rather not deal with it. And when she is on the board, she does get played, a decent amount, not a crazy amount. But she does kind of hover around this section here with like Frost and Oryx. And if she wasn't banned, her pick rate would be a lot higher. So Valk is pretty freaking good right now. Easy S tier character placement. So we're still on DLC characters. Who was released after Valk? This one, a lot of people aren't going to like this. Cav. Guys, I don't care, okay? Cav is a ranked operator. Cav has a very, very, very limited amount of usage in competitive because of droning and because of flank watch and because of intel gathering, okay? Soon as you have comms and information, Cav can't really do her job. Cav can have very isolated moments of glory where she catches a lurker off guard. But why would you bring Cav to deal with that when you can just dedicate a roamer to that? Why would you bring Cav when you could just bring a Vigil and then you can't drone him out as effectively? Cav does not do anything any other roamer can't do. That's the problem. And the thing that she can do is so difficult to line up. Everything has to go exactly right for that ability to pop off that she just really isn't that great in a competitive sense. In ranked, where you can take advantage of the fact that people aren't paying attention to stuff, yeah, Cav is a totally different kind of situation there. But when we're talking about Siege played at its most optimal level, Cav is just not a good character. She just isn't. All right, Echo. So Echo got a pretty serious nerf not too long ago where the cloaking for the drones was taken away. However, in certain instances, he is a nice sleeper pick. You can kind of base a little bit of a roam heavy strat around him, and you can basically create sort of like an active entry drone that you would for an attacker, but you can do that kind of dynamic with a defender instead. Not to mention, if you conceal the drone long enough, he can use it later on in the round to deny the diffuser plant. But he's not a must bring. There are a lot of situations where you're going to need the wall denial, you're going to need the more actionable kind of utility than the Echo yokais. And once you lose the yokais, then he has his deployable shield, and then that's kind of it, right? He has a decent gun, which is cool. He's kind of a situational pick where he's good at what he does, but he's not the end-all, be-all. He isn't brought 100% of the time as a result of that. Next up is Mira. Mira still gets banned a pretty significant amount, right? Check this out. We can see that she has a little over about like a 23-ish, 22-ish sort of percentage ban rate. So she still has a pretty decent amount of picks. But the thing is, she is a little bit weaker than she used to be. And she's not at S tier anymore. However, I can't justify putting her a lot lower because she does something that a lot of characters don't do, right? She completely changes the dynamic of how attackers approach the map. This is kind of a similar sort of vein to why we ranked Valk and Smoke the way that we have. When these two characters are on the board, the attackers, they don't have a choice, right? They have to deal with these characters being on the board, and Mira is definitely one of these kinds of situations where she fundamentally changes the dynamic on a lot of different sites that are very linear, where she can make an emplacement and then combo that up with other utility like Jaeger ADSs, like Wamai discs, right? She can pretty much construct the map in her own unique sort of way, but there are a lot of sites where it's a little bit more difficult to justify bringing her to the lineup, right? Like I wouldn't really bring Mira on top floor bank, for instance, right? I'd probably rather run a typical sort of Azami castle kind of setup for the window play there. I'd rather have Azami to cut off angles from the windows on the exterior of the building, things like that. But for Oregon basement, Mira is a significant pain in the butt to deal with. So she's good on a lot of sites. She's not great on some sites. So she gets a decent amount of play, just not all the freaking time, and not as much as Smoke or Valk. Lesion is a very nice mix-up op. He's at B tier, where he sees play in lots of different compositions, not all the time. His pick rate in competitive is pretty decent, as we can see here, about 15% pick rate. He doesn't get banned anymore. His intel gathering has taken a hit ever since he went from being kind of broken, let's be honest, to a decent character that is good for the sites that he's on. Good example of sites to bring Lesion on would be Theme Park Basement, right, where you can put some Lesion mines and split. You can put some on Yellow Stairs. You have a lot of versatility in terms of the ways that you can approach an intel gathering sort of defense with Lesion, hatch drops, things like that. He's a nice character to bring as a sort of X factor, as a sort of like plug in and play kind of situation. But there are going to be situations where you would rather have the Smoke, you would rather have the Valk, right? He's not an S tier character, and he's not as good as, say, Mute, because he doesn't have wall denial, but he is good at what he does. This was a tough one to rank Ela. I actually like playing Ela a lot in ranked. I actually get a decent amount of mileage out of the gun. I like playing off of the traps. The traps have a really wide effective radius. You can throw them onto people. They detonate pretty quickly, but she's a ranked character, and she is useful in some situations in a competitive situation, but you want to play more for the gun, I think, than the traps. Some really mechanically skilled players will take advantage of the high rate of fire that the Scorpion has, and they'll tell the roamer, hey, just cook. Go cook with the Scorpion and get some frags. And there are a lot of situations where if you really want that dedicated deep roam, why don't you bring someone like a Vigil, right? Why don't you bring a Mozzie? Because those characters actually kind of have gadgetry, right? They actually impact the way that the attackers approach the situation, whereas Ela just kind of throws the mine and then she runs around, and the mine is a little bit more difficult to act off of than it used to be. It doesn't have that kind of X factor anymore, and the gun's kind of difficult to use. So Ela's not a terrible character. She's better than Cav. There are going to be options, I think, a lot of the time that are better just on paper, just on the stat sheet, though. Like I said, there are situations where you'd probably rather bring a Vigil. Vigil, he was a lot higher at one point, but now there are other characters where it's sort of like, I kind of want to bring the utility instead. And he is good at what he does. He's really good on maps that are really big, where he can take advantage of the size differential in terms of actually roam clearing him specifically, kind of in the same vein that Oryx can take advantage of having a large map where he can be a lot more difficult to roam clear specifically. But Vigil, just because that aspect of his kit, that whole drone denying sort of thing, doesn't really, it is kind of a selfish ability, right? It doesn't help keep the wall closed. It doesn't help with area denial, right? It's very kind of isolated sort of utility specifically to benefit him, and he can take advantage of that, and he can make plays as a result of that. But because the utility is limited in that sort of aspect, he's not a end-all be-all, and he's not really, brought 100% of the time as a result of that, because there are situations where you'd rather have, more actionable kind of utility than Vigil. A character that gets brought a lot more than Vigil, as we can see here, who's the primary roamer, deep roamer? Alibi. Alibi is about 20% at invite. Alibi is B tier, right? She doesn't have the wall deny. She doesn't have the area deny that we're looking at up here, that sort of X factor sort of gadgetry. But what she has is a very easy to control gun that doesn't have a lot of recoil, and it has a high rate of fire. So it lets roamers cook, it lets talented mechanical players cook, And she also has a nice kind of little side ability in the fact with the prismas where you can throw them on windows. You can use that bait to actually kind of make plays off of every once in a while if you put them on common pre-fire kind of spots. So she actually does gather intel, right? She gathers intel. She gives pings on characters that shoot the prismas whenever they get into a gunfight with your anchor on site, for instance, and then the stray bullet catches the prisma. That is impactful, right? That affects your ability to react to the situation. You might have a roamer somewhere and they see the ping and they go, oh, okay, cool. I can maneuver over here now because now I know that there is a character in this exact location where I might have thought that they were over here instead. That's something that Vigil doesn't really do, right? So Alibi is good for what she does. She's arguably one of these, I would say, like top 3 strongest roamers in the game right now, but because the utility isn't like super duper, like we're not talking wall denial, right? It's not super important, but it does have playmaking ability. And as a result, she's a solid B tier character right in the middle. Next up, we went to Italy, right? So the next operator is going to be Maestro. So Maestro, you can melee the glass now. So that kind of knocked him down a peg. It's still good. You can still place the Maestros in synergy with other kinds of utility, especially Goyo. Something that I see Maestro do a lot is for a bank basement kind of hold, you can set up Maestro cameras, and then those can shoot Goyo canisters that you have set up on the site. You add that kind of layer of area denial for the plant. You set the Goyo canisters off. You have a smoke. You have another C4 in the back. You have multiple layers of area denial to deny plant specifically with, and Maestro can be used in Goyo synergies. That's a really nice thing to have. Any kind of intel is nice to have. Let's not beat around the bush. But at the same time, that is just, 2 cameras that you can put, and they can be dealt with, right? They have a lot of counters. You have secondary EMPs. You can melee the glass, and once you open the camera, then it gets vulnerable. It gets shot. So you got to know what you're doing with the Maestro setup. He's not something that you can just kind of, I don't think you can really like ramrod him into, a mainstay sort of pick. And he has his, useful, like niche oriented kind of role. But there are a lot of times where there are other characters that I would rather have on the board, right? Like if we don't have a Jaeger for my border half-wall player, I'm not going to bring a Maestro, right? So that's, think of the tier list not necessarily as like the character is bad. It's just that there are situations where you can't use this specialized kind of job for every single kind of situation. And Maestro falls into that kind of category. Next up, more DLC ops, Clash. Clash took a really heavy hit, especially in the recent meta. There's just not a lot of situations where I want to have a Clash. Like, I want Clash for Rafters CC Clubhouse. That's cool. Maybe double it up with a Jaeger ADS, maybe even a Thunderbird. But, like, why would you bring a Clash when you have all these other characters on the board? So, it's really tough to justify her in a lot of situations. There are some where you can take advantage of the fact that she can just kind of sit and hold, like, a corridor, for instance, right? Rafters Clubhouse is an example of what I'm talking about, where you have to deal with the Clash. You have to allocate utility to that because otherwise she'll just sit there and then go zappy zap and then you can't get the map control that you want. But that is dictated by the map geometry specifically. And there are a lot of sites where I don't want a Clash. Why would I bring Clash for Oregon Basement, right? Why would I bring Clash for Consulate top floor? Why would I bring Clash for Cafe top floor? Right? There's just too many situations where it's difficult to justify bringing Clash over other characters, and so I can't bring her much higher than D tier. You know who I'd rather have than Clash? I'd rather have Kaed a lot of the time. Kaed is a very versatile electricity operator. In the same vein as Mute, I would put him a little bit higher if there weren't secondary EMPs. If Thatcher wasn't in the game. If Thatcher was still like a must ban in the current kind of operator environment. Kaed can deny hatches. He can double up Cade Claws on one particular hatch on sites where you don't really need to focus as much on the wall. Good example is Oregon Basement for that meeting hatch, where you're not going to be worried about losing like the box wall. You're going to keep that open. The elbow is going to get reinforced later, eventually, right? And you're relying more on the smoke for that sort of map control denial. So you can put like 2 Cade sticks on that particular hatch, for instance. For Bank Basement, you want to have a Cade to deny hatches. There are just too many sites in the game that are dependent on hatches where Kaed can leverage that sort of advantage. And then also Kaed is useful at wall denial. In instances where he isn't dealt with efficiently, he can actually just effectively trick off all the charges off of a wall. If Thatcher and Thermite don't get their timings right, then, Kaed can keep the wall closed. And that's obviously really nice to have in a way that Bandit can't really do, in a way that Mute can't really do. He also has C4 and his guns are pretty solid as well. He's used a lot. He is a very important operator in the current meta. A lot of what goes on in terms of the gadget dance revolves around Kaed currently. Another DLC op, Mozzie. Mozzie is a C tier character who used to be really, really freaking good, especially with the super shorty. But now, you can't really rely on that intel denial in the same way that you would with a Solis, right? Mozzie used to have that sort of like drone denial kind of thing that was just like isolated to him. But now with Solis on the board, you can just bring a Solis and then she does that job a million times better, right? So Mozzie is good for situations where you want to have like a little layer of drone protection, right? To keep a certain kind of roam strategy that you're doing just a little bit more difficult to figure out for the attackers. Especially if Solis is banned, it's nice to have a Mozzie on the board every once in a while, but he's not a mainstay character. He's not going to be brought 100% of the time because, as you can see with a lot of these other characters here, they're gonna fit themselves into the job a little bit more effectively a lot of the time. It's not, again, not to say that this character is bad, not to say that any of the characters in this tier are bad, but Mozzie is just not brought a million times because he doesn't really have sight setup utility ever since he lost the shotgun. And his gadget requires certain kinds of conditions to be met in order for it to work, especially as opposed to Solis. Here's a character that's actually going to get a little bit more mileage, I think, in a lot of situations than Mozzie in terms of gadget usage. Warden. I don't know why people keep saying Warden is still bad. I don't know why people keep asking for a Warden rework. Warden is good. Warden is actually brought a lot more than I think people realize. Warden has a had a almost 40% pick rate in Pro League at Invite this year. That's more than Mute. Warden was banned. Warden was banned in certain instances. Warden was banned, you can see here, Warden was banned more than Mute. Warden's ability to sit pretty on a piece of map control like a pillar, or maybe like Pixel Spot for Cafe is a great example, right? With Jaeger ADSs, with a shield, he can sit there, they burn the ADSs, okay, do we want to frag grenade him out? Do we want to flash grenade him out? The only way that you can deal with a Warden is with a frag grenade. Stuns aren't going to work on him. You can't do smoke executes when a Warden's on the board. He is a direct counter to Ying, who is an A tier, if not S tier character right now, who has a significant ban rate. If you can't justify banning the Ying, then you're going to have to bring a Warden because of the flash deny. So Warden has his job, right? Denying flashes is not insignificant in this current gunfighting-centric kind of meta. I can't believe that people are sleeping on this guy still in a ranked environment. All we talk about is how, the game is so gunfight-centric. Yeah, what do you think is going to be useful in a gunfight-centric meta? Flashbangs, dude. Warden is a solid character, and he deserves his B-tier rating, but because he doesn't have, like, wall deny, he's not Mira, and he's not Smoke, I can't put him much higher than that, but he's a solid character right now. So remember I was talking about Tachanka and Smoke? Goyo is super slept on, and I wish I could put him higher, but because of the way his gadget works, it struggles to function in certain kinds of environments where the map geometry doesn't quite line up for you. But for instance, on Oregon, he's good on a number of sites on that map, especially Oregon Basement. There was a default setup I saw during Invite where you could put a Goyo canister on the default barricade. That default barricade goes down, and that instantly denies a blitz rush, which is not insignificant. Denies a Ying rush into, like, Blue Elbow. You can put another Goyo can for the default plant on that bomb chassis by box. You can put a Goyo can on Freezer. You can put a Goyo can towards Laundry. And the thing that's really cool about Goyo cans is that anyone can use them. Anybody, any of your defenders, right? Whatever position that they are on, as long as they're set up correctly, Goyo brings much more actionable kind of area deny whenever you want it, from wherever you want it, in a way that Tachanka does not. However, because you're stuck with that sort of in-placed kind of position, there are lots of environments, there are lots of sites where it's a little bit more difficult to justify that. And so I can't, bring him much higher than here, But, you know, don't get me wrong, right? Just because he's in this tier does not mean he is a bad character. For the sites where you can take advantage of, especially with the shotgun, right? You can shoot out head level holes to make it easier to shoot the canisters. For the environments where you can set up the canisters to your defender's sort of interests, Goyo is pretty freaking good, right? 20 seconds of clock denial with fire to deny plant is not insignificant. Next up, Oryx is a very solid roamer right now. I'd say in the same vein as a character like Alibi, Oryx benefits, especially in map terrain, where the map is really big, and he can take advantage of the dash ability to make it a serious pain in the ass to roam clear him, especially where he can open up hatches. Oryx can just be this perpetual nuisance throughout the course of the round that forces attackers to deal with him, right? Because if you don't deal with him, then you get flanked later. And that's a huge pain in the butt, that ever sort of persistent threat with Oryx. Also, his gun is pretty freaking good. It has a really high rate of fire. It doesn't have a lot of recoil. So if you're a mechanically talented player, you can certainly leverage that. To that point, Oryx had a pretty solid presence here at Invite with a 20% pick rate, where, like I said, maps like Bank, maps like Chalet, where he has a lot of ground to clear, Oryx can be a very potent sort of deep roamer. And he has sight set up with his ability to run through walls. He also has a bailiff, right? Oryx is a pretty versatile roamer in this current meta. You know, it's not a super like big util pick. For instance, if you trade out like Oryx for an ace, right? The ace is going to be the more significant trade in that kind of situation. But he is good at what he does, so he's a solid B tier character. Next up is one of our grenade catchers, Wamai. And Wamai divvies up this role with Jaeger. He goes back and forth with Jaeger now. It used to be you would only really bring a Wamai when you had a Jaeger on the board. Now Wamai can be used sort of like an independent alternative to Jaeger, an independent grenade catcher. But the thing about Wamai is that he is reactive throughout the course of a round, whereas Jaeger is set up at the beginning of the round. Wamai is good for environments where you don't really know what the attackers are going to do in terms of their utility clearing kind of setup. He can position himself wherever he wants and then respond a little bit more directly to what the attackers are doing. Whereas Jaeger is really good if you know for certain that you need to keep this map control, right? So Oregon, blue bunker right for elbow. Put that deployable shield there. Cafe Pixel. For lots of other different kinds of sites, trying to think, example off the top of my head. Okay, Chalet. Chalet is a great map for Wamai, for instance, right? Because of all those windows, you're going to have a bunch of windows that are going to get opened up throughout the course of a round, and you kind of want that reactivity with the disc. You can throw it across the room safely. Wamai and Jaeger split up this role, right? Wamai is brought about 35% of the time. Jaeger's brought about 30% of the time. So they're not brought all the time. Their job is important, but it's not wall deny. It's not intel deny, and it's not smoke. Right? So it's an important job, but it's not an end-all be-all. And there are situations where you won't bring a Jaeger. You won't bring a Wamai. It depends entirely upon your strategy. Melusi. So Melusi did get hit kind of hard by the speed change, right? She's not as effective as she was in the sense that she can't position herself as efficiently as she used to because of the speed change. That's just the nature of the situation, right? She's not as reactive in gunfights as she used to be. She plays a little bit more of an anchor role now. But the Banshee is still useful. However, it's not like the end of the world. Okay, there are options to deal with the Banshee. There's Gon 6. There's secondary EMPs. There's lots of different ways to deal with the Melusi wub. However, it's not to say that it's a bad gadget. She sits at about like an 18% sort of pick rate. But as you can see here, right, this is kind of sitting towards the bottom of the chart, right? This isn't towards the top. And it's just one of those gadgets where you like the gadget when it is available, but there are going to be situations where you would rather have the Lesion. You would rather have the Frost. You'd rather have the Alibi, right? Because she doesn't have that roam game presence that she used to, and her gun is kind of tough to use, right? It's not terrible, but it has kind of middle of the pack sort of fire rate for an SMG, and its damage output is really, really awful. There are so many better defending SMGs if you want that fragging power. For instance, Oryx has a better gun. Valk obviously has a better gun. Smoke has a little bit more fragging power than Melusi, right? So she's good for that kind of situation where it's like, okay, I need like this staircase cut off. I need this corridor cut off. We have to have this, specifically for this strat to work. This needs to be delayed just a little bit, but she's not an end-all be-all character anymore. Next up, Aruni. She got a little bit of a hit by a speed change as well. And the Roni especially, the Roni getting the magazine nerf not too long ago hit her especially hard. She's kind of a situational pick right now. Let's look at the pick rate, right? About 15%. She has grenade catch. Sometimes she is a component of a ban strategy. As you can see here, she got banned every once in a while. Aruni, like I said, with the rest of these characters in this tier, is not bad. She is good at what she does. There are some situations, especially on window-heavy kinds of maps, like especially Consulate top floor, where you can get a lot of mileage out of the Surya gates. She's good on Chalet as well. You can combo up Aruni with a Jaeger and Wamai for a ton of grenade catch. But why would you do that when you can, bring a smoke, right? You can bring a Valk. There's so many other characters that you can bring in a lot of different situations where it's kind of tough to justify, putting Aruni into like every single composition. At least like, it's a little bit difficult to justify the same kind of pick rate she had in utility soak meta, where she was sitting, I think, about like 30 to 40% of the time. Because something that was really underrated about the Surya Gate was that it caught grenades, right? If you positioned it correctly. The Surya Gate can be a useful component of a strat right now, but it's not like I have to bring in Aruni, right? There are other characters that I have to bring as opposed to Aruni. So she has that specific kind of strategy every once in a while where it works, but it's not the end of the world if you don't bring her. All right, another D tier character. Some people aren't going to like this one. Okay, Thunderbird. Okay, look. Listen. Okay. Thunderbird is good for chip damage deny, right? She is good, especially if you're going to anticipate a lot of verticality, right, from a sledge or a fuse, something like that, right? Like cafe, bakery, okay? Where verticality is pretty much going to be almost it's almost a necessity for the attackers to get verticality for that site, to take it properly, unless they go for a direct take, which, that's usually what's going to happen in ranked. But when we're talking about a competitive environment, Thunderbird, she's just in a really tough spot because, her gun has a lot more recoil, right, than as opposed to the previous version of it. She's just kind of a gunfighter ranked kind of character. And why would I bring that sort of character when I have all of this other utility, right? It just heals. When you have I just heal, and that's my ability in a game that is so util dependent, it's kind of, there are just a lot of situations where it's like, why the heck would I bring a Thunderbird when I can bring everything above Thunderbird here in this list? And she is good at what she does. I'm not going to deny that, but there are just like, it's really, really tough to justify her in some instances compared to other characters, especially when you consider the fact that if you lose the map control that the Kona station goes on, then she starts healing the other team. That's really, really tough. So there are some environments where it's like, okay, yeah, you can bring a Thunderbird to give that little bit of boost to hold that kind of map control. But why would you do that when you can put, like, Clubhouse Rafter is a good example, right? Why would I do that when I can just put a Melusi wub on the staircase instead? Or I can put a Mozzie Pest on Swamp, or on the like the drone hole there underneath the wall. I can put a Maestro camera on the top of the at the back of the rafters, right? There's just lots of situations where it's like, why do I need a Kona station, right? It's tough to justify. Another operator that's kind of tough to justify now is Thorn. Thorn definitely got hit by a nerf when you take into consideration the fact that the gun got nerfed and then you basically had to put an extended barrel on to get that same kind of value out of it. And even then the value is not as high as it used to be. In fact, when you consider what Thorn does, compared to her competition, yes, those mines can be useful in some select sorts of scenarios. I do like to play Thorn in ranked. I like to use the 50 cal, sorry, not quite 50 cal SMG to make little holes in the floor and then kind of, hide the Thorn trap in ways that make it a little bit more difficult to spot and thus, shoot out. You can put a bunch of Thorns over a particular kind of room and sort of make that room into a sort of gauntlet of traps that a attacker will usually just kind of end up sprinting through if they're not doing their due diligence and paying attention. But in a competitive environment, it's a tough gadget to justify in a lot of situations because most of the time, right, the Thorn trap goes off and then they just kind of run back, right? And you also are going to have other attackers that are going to play off of each other a little bit more effectively in terms of the positioning game, where you're not going to be able to immediately swing off of the information that you get there. So it's just kind of a weird gadget that, I would almost put Thorn in her own category in between C and D, but when you look at the breadth of the competition, when you look at the entire roster, there's just a lot of situations where it's like, why would I bring a Thorn? And that's reflected in her pick rate, which, she doesn't even show up on the chart here. And that says a lot, right, about her presence at Invite. It just wasn't particularly high, even with the deployable shield, even with the gadget being, not completely useless. And last but not least, I don't think you're going to be surprised by these ratings for the last 2 defenders we've had added to the game. Azami. Azami is so freaking good. Okay, Azami can literally just completely play a different game than everybody else on the team. Okay, she can fundamentally construct the map in a certain kind of way that attackers have to allocate util towards. Even in the gunfighting-centric meta, I can't imagine what she would be like in Utility Soak Simulator, but even in the gunfighting-centric meta that we have right now, Azami's ability to not only react to situations on the fly, but also to have certain kinds of pre-placed sort of barricade setups, it makes her one of the more dynamic characters in the game, and you're only limited by your creativity and your imagination with Azami barricades. Right now, Azami look at this, right? Like, if you're not talking about the ban rate specifically, I guess about like 38%, right? Put these two together, and she would be a lot higher in terms of pick rate, right? This is still like 40%-ish pick rate. This is really freaking high. Okay, this is all the way at the top of the chart. And we can take a look at some examples of how Azami can actually just, completely just give your entire team a completely different option in terms of positioning. See this, right? So you usually want to play here in Trump Office, and you would normally have castle barricades for this, but Azami can throw something on this chandelier here, right? I'm going to get to that part in just a second. Throw it on this little rope, that bit, and then it'll cut off that angle from outside the building. And you don't need to allocate a castle. You don't need to allocate anything else, right? This is what I'm talking about. She basically constructs the map the way that you want it. You have a tailor-made bulletproof barricade wherever you want, and if you place it correctly, then they can't melee it, right? There's no way to melee this. You have to use utility to deal with this. There is no other option for the attackers. So that's just one example. And Azami just does so much, right? She can react to situations on the fly. She has both, right? She has reactivity, and she has the ability to do pre-placed sort of pre-planned sort of setups. She fits on just about every freaking site on the game, and she doesn't have like a certain kind of, I guess, X factor that keeps her from being, brought as opposed to another character, right? The only case you could, I think, make for her is the fact that she doesn't have wall deny. But then you can just bring all these other characters. So, like, there's just not a lot of situations where Azami is bad. She's really freaking good in the current meta. And then finally, we get to our most recently added defender, at least not until Season 2 of this year, Solis. Solis is up there in terms of the ban rate as well. If we look, we see about 25%, and the pick rate is not insignificant. Solis just, like, her ability to deny drones is so freaking good. Okay, good examples of where she is powerful include any kind of map, like the Oryx example that we talked about, are maps where the map is really big, and then she just destroys like half of the drones, right? And then you can just do whatever you want. The attackers have to allocate all these resources to deal with your roam clear. They might have to bring a Dokkaebi, they might have to bring a Jackal Lion, right? Solis Solis appears, right? You pick Solis, and then you're like, I don't like that you have drones. I don't like those. You can't have them. And then she just denies them, and then you can do whatever you want on defense, right? And she can see the diffuser. So she plays 2 different games. She has intel deny game with the drone hunting, and then she has diffuser plant deny through vertical floors with the impact grenades, and she can see where the case is at all times. So those 2 aspects alone, right? She can deny information, and she has the most useful bit of information that the defenders can have, which is where is the case, right? Because the objective is to keep the case from getting planted. So Solis is just playing a different game than every other character in Rainbow Six Siege right now. And her presence just completely changes everything when she's available on the board. And that's why, she gets banned, a significant amount. It's kind of tough, right? I personally think that I don't think she should be able to see the case. I think if she wasn't able to see the case, if she wasn't able to see diffuser, you could see this go down maybe go back down to A tier. But as it stands, right, she has great guns. She has verticality to deny case. She is the best drone denier in the game. She she play, you know, I'm going to say it again. She just plays a completely different game of Rainbow Six Siege, and it's fun. Don't get me wrong. I think she's a great character to play. But from a competitive environment, she does, you know, there is a little bit of an argument to be made there, I think, in terms of like maybe fine-tuning her just a tiny bit, which it's unbelievable that I ever thought that she was going to be kind of mid when she first came out. And then I saw, you know, her competitive sort of environment, and then I was like, oh, wow, yeah. So Solis, easy S tier character, completely changes the dynamic for the attackers and the defenders. And it's hard to justify her being any lower than that. So this is my final list of defenders going into commanding force. I don't think this is going to change, you know, too drastically. There's really nothing happening that's different here from Solar Raid going into commanding force. So you can use this as a reference point for your operator selection or just general kind of game knowledge moving forward here for at least a little bit longer. But if you want to see more tier lists like this as the game kind of gets more updates, feel free to subscribe, like the video. It does help me out quite a bit. Let me know why your favorite operator should actually be higher than where they are placed in the current tier list as is. And thanks so much for watching this video. I'll see you guys in the next one. Deuces.